All right. Good evening, fellow conservation champions. Carl Malcolm here, Vice President of Conservation for the Rough Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society, coming to you on Giving Tuesday for our sixth and final installment of our regional updates and our second to last session for the day. I am very pleased to be joined here by John Steigerwaldt. John serves as our Forest Conservation Director for the Western Great Lakes region. He is our longest tenured Forest Conservation Director with a tremendous team working with him there in the Western Great Lakes. We're going to get a chance to get some updates from John about the work of the past year, things on the horizon he's excited about. But before we jump into all that, just a little bit about our plan here for Giving Tuesday. Our objectives are multifaceted. So first of all, we're trying to open up line of communication within our community, all the people who make the work that we do here at the Rough Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society possible. We want to be able to say a very sincere thank you to everybody who's been supporting the work of the organization and everybody who's a part of the organization. So that includes our members, it includes our chapter volunteers, it includes donors, and really it includes anybody who is engaged with caring about or acting on behalf of forest health and wildlife conservation. Goals for today: we want to share some information. We want to highlight our team. We also want to encourage people to renew memberships, join the organization, maybe think about getting memberships for friends or family members who care about forest and wildlife conservation. Direct people's attention to the many ways to support the work that we do. And there's a link here embedded on the page that you can follow to learn more about all of that for Giving Tuesday. So today is a day that's all about trying to highlight nonprofits. If you're not familiar with Giving Tuesday, it's like the follow-up to Black Friday and Cyber Monday, but this one's really about supporting the good work that nonprofit organizations do. And obviously, if you're here with us, you care about upland birds, you care about forest health, you care about conservation, and we're a great fit if you're looking for an entity to support this Giving Tuesday. So with that covered, John, want to start off just asking you to give a little bit of like a personal introduction. So, talk a little bit about the work you've been doing with RGS and AWS, but also let us know like what it is that drew you to this organization and this field, this professional field.
I think I can do that. I guess start by saying thanks, Carl, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for attending this. And happy to be here, and really looking forward to all the questions that you guys might be able to throw my way. Definitely looking through those who are in attendance, see a lot of familiar names, and no surprise that you guys are here supporting the Rough Grouse Society. So thank you for coming and attending. So as Carl said, my name is John Steigerwaldt. I'm the Forest Conservation Director for the Rough Grouse Society, American Woodcock Society, covering the Western Great Lakes. I've been with the Rough Grouse Society, American Woodcock Society for about 7.5 years. So I am rather tenured conservation staff with the organization. Not quite the most tenured conservation staff. That honor falls to Mr. Jared Elm, who's our forest conservation coordinator out of Spooner, Wisconsin. Myself, I am also located out of Spooner, Wisconsin. And when we say I cover the Western Great Lakes, I cover Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, as well as the Western UP. Now, I've been with the organization long enough to see us sort of transform, evolve a little bit over time. Some of the names I see in attendance are from folks I used to work with fairly closely in Michigan. At one time, I did cover all of the Great Lakes and Upper Midwest region, but as we grew our conservation program, conservation region, became too much for one forest conservation director to oversee, especially with a lot of things that we're going to talk about hopefully later today, where we want to grow and evolve into. So some of you worked with me when I was in that role, covering Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio as well. But I guess what, to your primary question, Carl, what gets me going, what kind of got me motivated and excited to join the Rough Grouse Society is I think, first off, my background, I'm a third generation forester. My grandfather was a forester. Uh, Actually, during World War II, he was General MacArthur's staff forester. After the war, he ran his own consulting company, worked for the Wisconsin Conservation Department. At that time, that's now the Wisconsin DNR. Um, I have uncles, cousins, father, all have worked in the forestry or forest products industry. And so it's kind of like I've been uh, cultivated to be a forester. So it's kind of a natural calling to be in this field. And being a forester, no other sort of conservation organization, conservation nonprofit in our sphere has the same sort of reputation to the professional realm as the Rough Grouse Society. We are the stalwarts, the advocates for our forestry, for our forests, forest wildlife, and our forest health, especially in the eastern United States. Early in my career, I actually had the opportunity to be exposed to the Rough Grouse Society as an organization, actually funding one of my first jobs outside of college, or partially funding one of my first jobs outside of college, working as a lowly limited term county forester. So I had some early career exposure to rough grouse and rough grouse management through some of those positions I had early on. But I think kind of my career trajectory landed me in really this role. Having that forestry and forest management background, earned a master's degree in wildland fire ecology. So learning more of the ecosystem traits, the ecosystem processes, wildlife attributes of natural resources management. Some of that early career exposure I talked about, but also a lot of the background I had was really in industry as well. So kind of this mix of exposure to all kinds of aspects of forestry and all kind of facets that RGS we touch as an organization, um, as those advocates for forest wildlife.
So 7.5 years in the job, you've seen some things change. We we've had a couple questions come up over the course of the day alluding to the change in the business model for the organization. And I think as I consider our 6 different regions and just the organizational growth that's occurred, in no small part because of your tenure in leadership, the Western Great Lakes is a place where we have a stronghold of staff, of partnerships, of work happening on the ground. It is, I think of it as like a very mature organization with a lot of capacity. So just for the benefit of folks who maybe aren't as familiar with the change in the business model, and I'm thinking about like other regions growing in a similar kind of trajectory, but could you just talk about what that has entailed and explain a little bit about that shift and how you've been able to help um, lead through that period of growth for the Western Great Lakes?
Yeah, I think some of that comes back towards maybe the vision of our board and of our president and CEO Ben Jones, really thinking about RGS and our regional forest conservation directors really being advocates and experts within our region, as well as architects. Right, we're the ones who are building the conservation program within our individual regions that really kind of support our mission. Looking at strategically what are the partnerships we need to pursue, the funding that we need to pursue, the science that we need to follow, and really building out strategic plan work towards accomplishing those goals. It takes people, it takes funding, it takes support, it takes following the most up to date science and management practices that are available to make that work happen and move the needle not just on forest conservation for rough grouse and American woodcock, but all forest wildlife. Um, so I really think it was this change in our way of thinking in terms of how we have to build these conservation programs and be more proactive in our sort of approaches towards forest conservation and maybe a little less reactive to it, and thinking about not just what are we doing now, but what are we going to be doing next year, 5 years from now, and further down the road to really get towards moving the needle on forest conservation.
And so at this point, give a sense to folks of like the full breadth of your team. What's that organizational structure look like? Who are some of the like key players? What does it look like when it comes to delivering that work on the ground?
So it we have I've we'll start by saying we have an immensely talented staff in the Western Great Lakes. I think all of our staff bring their own individual attributes, expertise, background to our organization in their positions and role with RGS and AWS. Sort of our structure right now really looks like we have individual state conservation coordinators that are really leading and supervising our delivery staff. Um, where I kind of more work on that strategic level, thinking about growing our program, sustaining our program. Um, they're really focused on more of that implementation and the day to day, making sure it happens on the ground. Underneath our forest conservation coordinators, which we have one in Minnesota, one in Wisconsin, one in the Western UP. That'd be Scott Johnson for Minnesota, Jared Elm already mentioned for Wisconsin, and Seth Finkel in the Western UP. Underneath them, then we have our delivery staff, which is composed of our forest wildlife specialists and forestry technicians, which we have sort of several within each state, which is a little bit evolving as we come into funding. Funding expires, and we pursue additional funding for different grants and agreements with our partners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm tempted. I want to dig into the work a little bit, but maybe just shifting gears for a moment and recognizing we've got a lot of folks in the space with us here who are probably starting to kind of wrap up hunting season. Although there's some stalwarts who are undoubtedly going to be, trudging around in the snow that we've recently received here in the Midwest and elsewhere. But I'm going to ask you just to do a little reflecting on your 2025 upland bird hunting season, John. Like, what's the report from Spooner? We had a chance to spend some time together at the National Grouse and Woodcock Hunt up in northern Minnesota. What are some highlights or takeaways from the 2025 season from your perspective?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that was a benefit of the job of working for the Rough Grouse Society, American Woodcock Society, is that we do have the opportunity to um, stretch our legs a little bit and our dogs' legs in the woods. Um,
Yes.
a lot of our conservation staff are active hunters, um, and I'm no exception. I've talked many times on different podcasts or different things I've been on or different media about sort of my reintroduction to rough grouse hunting. Through the R3, reactivation, retention. I always forget the other one.
Recruitment.
Recruitment, the most
I'm
important one.
I'm with you.
Where I was reactivated. I rough grouse hunted when I was younger. Kind of gave that up and went more to deer hunting and kept that and fishing while I was going through college, early career. A lot of things going on. You can only do so many things. It wasn't until I came to RGS that I got back into rough grouse hunting, upland bird hunting. It's been a journey for me. Um, uh, got my first, my own bird dog shortly after I started for Rough Grouse Society. My Vizsla, Hazel, she's in her prime now, and I
Mm-hmm.
would say we had a relatively good rough grouse season for the amount of time that we've gone out.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, across the board is probably an average season. Some of our data from the National Grouse Woodcock Hunt that you mentioned supports that. Our harvest was, on par with our 10-year average. We know that we're currently in the downswing of the rough grouse cycle, so it wasn't really unexpected that we weren't going to be encountering nearly as many birds this year. It did seem like the birds that we were encountering were either really young juveniles, um, you know, potentially birds from a second hatch, or adults. Actually, a lot of hunters I spoke with, kind of similar story to me, just really harvesting a lot of adult birds. Um, So I think in the data from National Hunt kind of supports that. As recruitment was down, but again, not totally surprising. I did find it kind of hard for the woodcock hunt, as I think a lot of hunters did as well. The weather conditions were just immaculate. Early season, throughout the majority of the woodcock season, we really didn't have any of those sort of major weather events or climactic shifts. Large storms that tend to push a lot of woodcock down from Canada. In the flights of woodcock, so a lot of hunters were encountering resident birds. It wasn't really towards the end of the season here in Wisconsin I started to encounter some definite flight birds. So the woodcock hunting was a little bit disappointing, just because of really the woodcock not moving down until really later in the woodcock season. But we still did manage to pull together a relatively good season. I will say this year I did screw up. I was talking about this in the green room a little bit before you came into the green room, even Carl, and you know the story well, because I've had to request off quite a few days off to go deer hunting. I made the mistake of getting back into deer hunting this past year. I had some nice bucks coming in on a trail camera of mine, and I had the really dumb idea that I was going to be lucky enough to harvest one of those deer. And man, I screwed up. I should have been with my bird dog. Again, she's kind of in her prime. I should have been out for about a 3 week period with her and just let the deer, you know, follow my plan to keep my deer hunting for later in life, when maybe my joints don't work as well. So, although I will say my dog Hazel did need a break, um, a little bit mid-season. She did tear up one of her paws, so it was good to give her a break from that, get into deer hunting. But I should have probably just got her back in. And now there's a ton of snow, and
Yeah,
Vizslas do not like snow. So I think she's a little bit stir crazy, being kind of cooped up. So I think we'll be getting her out later this week. So
good. Yeah, man.
hopefully she'll tolerate the snow well.
Well, if she's moving that body, she'll generate some warmth. And yeah, man, hindsight's 2020. Those
It
days would have
always is.
been much better spent bird hunting in retrospect. Um, yeah, I often lament that time of year that you have only, like 6 weeks between the beginning of October and the middle of November. If we could just find a way to stretch that out into like 4 months or so, I'd sign up for that plan.
I did have several weddings I had to attend as
Oh,
well.
dude, who are these people?
These
Who are these people getting married in October and November? Like, come on. You got 10 other months, people.
so
10 other months.
a lot of
That's
things
what,
working
that's
against
what
me this
June
season,
is
but
for. Like, get
I
married
will
in
say
June.
a lot of things working against me this season, but I did connect. So
Unless it's a couple where they go on their honeymoon bird hunting, right? And they want to spend their anniversary every year chasing bird dogs around in the woods. I guess
well,
I
now you're giving me ideas for next year. Maybe a vow renewals in order.
renew those vows, yeah, at bird camp. So, folks, we're here with John Steigerwaldt. Happy Giving Tuesday. We want to encourage audience participation, and I'm seeing we've got some questions popping into the chat. We've got a little commentary going on here. Let's take a look in the chat. We've got a question from Mark. We have hunting land in Carleton County, Minnesota. It seems the drought the last 3 to 4 years really impacted grouse and much more woodcock. How does research show drought affecting these two species? Anything to offer on that, John?
I think I can offer a little bit. I think Mark, a lot of your observations are pretty similar to what a lot of our hunters saw. We did definitely see um, those sort of uh, drought impacts coming through in the national hunt the past several years. As part of the national hunt, we gather data on recruitment of rough grouse and woodcock, as well as looking at the overall harvest trends, as well as taking any sort of observations and notes and documenting those from our hunters and participants, our huntsmen. And yeah, by and large, the past 2 years, those were some of the field notes that were coming in, especially last year at the national hunt, just lamenting or talking about just the severe drought conditions we had
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say it's pretty impactful, especially on woodcock. You have to think about the food sources that grouse and woodcock rely upon. A lot of especially early on in rough grouse development, you're talking invertebrates. For woodcock, you're talking about a diet nearly completely comprised of earthworms. So in terms of moisture, you need that for invertebrate production. However, we can go too far one the other way with moisture, rainfall. One thing we have also experienced, I'd say, especially my tenure with Rough Grouse Society, we've seen a lot of years with really heavy spring rains. Those can have the opposite effect where, we get too much moisture in a year and we can actually have drowning out of birds or nests, more exposure of those birds to the elements. Um, that can really affect recruitment, right? So we can have really too much moisture in a year and not enough moisture in a year that can be relatively impactful. I will say the past couple of years, talking to hunters, especially our national hunt, my own experiences hunting, really we last year we found a lot of birds sort of held up in any place we could find moisture
Mhm.
during the month of October, where you had a lot of these birds, probably unrelated birds, birds that had broken up the broods and kind of coming back or coalescing around, watering holes, so to speak, or areas where there was some moisture. So really, like those wide fluctuations in in really our moisture, but more broadly, just talking about our climate can have really dire effects on rough grouse and woodcock populations. One thing that we talk about and we prescribe, especially when it comes to uh, uh, mitigating effects from climate change, is really changing our forest management strategies overall. Talking about how we are really doing what we've done all along and be advocates for diverse forest management and really pushing for um, diversity of age classes, right? If we have one age class of forest that could be impacted by, a such and such type weather event or anomaly, if we have a diverse forest, those forests are going to be able to better weather those type of effects or those type of storms that may come in. We don't want it to be all young forest. We don't want it to be all old forest. We don't want it to be all middle age. We want to have a nice, sweet, and transition of different age classes.
Mhm.
We've also talked about how we can really incorporate in different management strategies for interstand diversity as one of our management approaches that we advocate for with our public land agencies, as well as a lot of the projects we implement. Talking about how we can incorporate conifer species into a lot of our aspen clear cuts or regeneration. Thinking about how we can have additional escape cover, thermal cover in years where we might have little to no snowfall. Right. We may not have that problem this year. We've already have a lot of snow in the Western Great Lakes and the Great Lakes in general. But I would say about the past 5, 10 years, we've had quite a few winters with very minimal snowfall.
Yep.
And of course, snow roosting is an incredibly important part of the winter ecology of rough grouse in this region. So thinking about ways that we can incorporate in uh, some escape cover and thermal cover to help augment or improve those conditions for rough grouse that may be exposed to predation, exposed to the elements. When we have poor snowfall is also one of our considerations. I know it's probably that's getting way off your topic of the drought, but it's those are a lot of things that we're incorporating in terms of the science and management of rough grouse.
No, I think that's spot on, man. That moisture, that precip comes all year round, right? And that lack of winter snowfall is part of the equation. And
It
there's some,
doesn't. One last little thread to pull on there too would be there's also those considerations that we think about in terms of impacts from West Nile virus as well.
Mhm.
We have the opposite of drought. We have those really wet years. It stands to reason that if we have really wet years, we're going to have a higher mosquito population. Higher mosquito population could potentially lead to greater effects from diseases like West Nile virus.
Mhm. We've got another uh, forest management oriented question that just popped in from Lee. So, John, we have 280 acres of forest in northern Wisconsin. 180 is single aged aspen that's about 25 years old. It is in MFL, which is the managed forest law. Is there any way to break up the aspen stand to create different age classes while remaining in this program?
I love this type of question. I actually used to get this question a lot because before I worked for RGS, I was a consulting forester, working specifically with the managed forest law program. And before that, I worked for the Wisconsin DNR in their tax law section. So I worked day in and day out with the managed forest law program. And it's a very, very simple answer to that question is yes, you can break up those aspen stands. The best way to go about doing that is contacting your local DNR tax law specialist. Sort of each county will have that go-to specialist to contact, um, and talk to them about sort of your management objectives, and they should be able to break up those age classes to meet your objectives. They can make some specific recommendations in terms of how that breakup could go. Of course, there are sort of guidelines that stay within the managed forest law program. You have to stay within productivity standards, um, and within the silvicultural guidelines of the individual species that you're managing. But there are ways to break it up. I would say two pieces of advice is you could, again, contact your tax law forester. I'd go to the Wisconsin DNR website and a search bar, search for a cooperating forester. That'll bring up a search bar where you can actually look county by county who your consulting foresters would be in terms of contacts, but as well as your DNR contacts. As well as I would actually contact one of RGS's staff. We have our own forest wildlife specialists who work within Wisconsin on private lands. It's part of our sort of private lands initiative in the state of Wisconsin. And we can help be that bridge between you as a landowner and the DNR forester to help talk about, our specific recommendations of how we would break up your stands of aspen, and get those plan changes made with the DNR in hand. We usually have a very good, close working relationship with them. Depending upon the county that you're in, we should have some resources available. You can search for our resources on the Rough Grouse Society website, roughgrousesociety.org, and navigate to the Western Great Lakes page where you can see the full list of our staff.
Mm-hmm. Lee, you came to the right place and asked the right person that question. Thanks for sending that our way, and want to continue encouraging people to add into the conversation here in the chat to bounce questions off of John, anything that's on your mind. And also, as John mentioned, head on over to roughgrousesociety.org and take a look at our region-specific content. And also, with it being Giving Tuesday, find some ways to support the organization. What I'm going to do today, I've got a list in my head of all the family members who have never been members of this organization who will be members before the day is through. That's going to be one of the Christmas gifts. And we, as part of that, the Covers Magazine, award-winning Covers Magazine, is a beautiful periodical for folks to be receiving in their mailboxes as part of that membership. So one of the things you can do to support the work that John and his team are doing in the Western Great Lakes. So John, let's talk a little bit more about that work. I'm running through the Rolodex in my head of all these projects happening on federal land, state land. There's been land acquisitions that we've been helping facilitate. Your team has helped facilitate. What are some of the highlights that you're most excited about as you look back on 2025 and think about the impact that you and your team have been having with the support of this community?
Well, I think there are two parts. I think there definitely has been a bit of a shakeup in terms of some of the federal funding that's happened this year. My team has done a tremendous job navigating through all those sort of type of changes and curveballs that have gotten thrown our way, and we've kept delivering conservation all through some of those changes. But we have secured some relatively large grants this year and a lot of large funds for quite a few projects. Some we just signed just recently or just got fully executed just recently. Some of those, looking at the Moose Habitat Collaborative in Minnesota is probably the largest one,
Mm-hmm.
or is the largest one. And I talk to people a lot about Moose Habitat Collaborative and RGS's involvement in the Moose Habitat Collaborative. For those who are not unfamiliar, uninitiated, the Moose Habitat Collaborative is a collaborative of conservation organizations like the Rough Grouse Society, our conservation partners, other nonprofits, public agencies, Superior National Forest, Minnesota DNR, tribes, counties, the Nature Conservancy, etc. All really focused on really diverse forest management in northeast Minnesota for creating moose habitat. And really, when we look at the habitat requirements for moose and the diversification that's happening on the landscape on a landscape scale under leadership of Scott Johnson, leading and executing that program. Um, it's really a story about diversifying our forests and some of the I would say some of the best or prime rough grouse habitat I've ever entered into in northern Minnesota has been a lot of these restoration areas we've gone into to create moose habitat sort of 15 years after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of how long this collaborative has been going on. We joined the collaborative under phase 4 as the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association sort of bowed out as the lead agent on the Moose Habitat Collaborative. RGS, we came in under phase 4. It's a little bit fuzzy. I believe it was 2020. Between when we actually put in the application and received the award, I believe it was 2021. But we've just put in for phase 5 funding. So under phase 4, we received $1.8 million to help execute this Moose Habitat Collaborative. And we just this year have gotten the contract from the state to enter into phase 5, which is over $2 million. It's a large project, a lot of moving parts, a lot of collaborative members impacting tens of thousands of acres. A long-standing project that really proud that we're able to enter into and assist the state, the Forest Service, all these partners with execution of that project. That's sort of part of our public land strategy in Minnesota. And when we look at our conservation strategy within the Western Great Lakes, we have this sort of mix of public lands and private lands.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at a state like Minnesota, the majority of the forest lands in Minnesota are publicly owned. So we have this very much a public land strategy in Minnesota. That's starting to change through the Moose Habitat Collaborative, the Arrowhead Collaborative that we're also members of. We're starting to, I think, build out those strategies to start looking at private lands, individual private lands programs and initiatives within Minnesota. But we look at a state like Wisconsin, which is very private lands heavy. Compared to Minnesota, the majority of forest land in Wisconsin is privately held. So we know we can't move the needle on forest wildlife conservation without the help of the private lands. So that's really driven the growth of our private lands program in Wisconsin. As a testament, the question was about the managed forest law program, which oversees itself as a state program that oversees 3.5 million acres of private lands in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so being part of those programs or other conservation programs like the Deer Management Assistance Program or involved with NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, like we are, and need to be involved with to move that needle. I would say those are some of the other programs I'm really proud of. And we actually just entered into our third round of funding with the Wisconsin DNR to extend an agreement that we have with the Wisconsin DNR another 2 years to employ 2 forest wildlife specialists in northern Wisconsin, one out of Hayward and one out of Rhinelander, who kind of work both on public and private lands. So that's be through the Deer Management Assistance Program on private lands, which, like moose, deer require a diversity of forest habitats, a diversity of forest age structure. So another great sort of program we tap into and ride along with to help advocate for diverse forests that benefit rough grouse. But at the same time, we have this public and private lands program where we have started to really build out that public lands program in Wisconsin on top of our private lands program. Which that private lands program in Wisconsin is one of our longest standing programs going back to 2016. So really excited about extending that project, that agreement. Um, really excited about the work that we're doing on private lands in Wisconsin. Um, but those public lands parts as well in Wisconsin are also really really exciting me. We've entered into our second stewardship agreement this year with the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, and we are just about ready to bid out our first timber sale on the Chequamegon National Forest through the Shared Stewardship Authority. Looking to the Western UP, actually, potentially tomorrow, we'll get authorization for our logger to move into our stewardship project on the Ottawa National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
We have a 271 acre timber sale that was bid out, put under contract 2 years ago, and that logger is looking to move in this winter because conditions are finally favorable to move in on that project. So looking at this combination of all these different strategies, partners we're working with, there's no end to, I think, the excitement that we're entered into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another highlight that I'd like to have you just touch on briefly: expanding partnerships in the South, right? Like what's going on with the collaboration down in Iowa?
So this is a project where I think I'm most excited about our expansion and sort of what's on the horizon. And this one's been in the works for quite a long time. Sort of building the pieces to this collaborative, this partnership with the Iowa DNR. But we entered into earlier this year. We started working on the bits and pieces of it, the funding for it, the securing the funding, both the private funds and the funds from the state of Iowa, from the Iowa DNR. We're entering into a collaborative agreement with the state of Iowa DNR, to hire a forester out of Fayette, Iowa, who will be working on um, both public and private lands, largely modeled after our agreement with the Wisconsin DNR, but more focused on implementing what RGS we've worked under called dynamic forest restoration block um, strategies, where we're looking at developing management planning on state lands in Iowa with the help and assistance of the Iowa DNR, and using sort of restoration on several WMAs as the hub of restoration. And so expanding sort of diversifying age classes on state lands and expanding that to really about a 5 to 10,000 acre area around each of these wildlife management areas in Iowa. There's been some renewed interest about rough grouse management in Iowa. Going back 30, 40 years, Iowa had tremendous rough grouse numbers. The driftless region in general had tremendous rough grouse numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to a lot of the old guys who've been around with the Rough Grouse Society for a while, they talk about, they wouldn't head north for rough grouse hunting. They would head southwest into the
Mm-hmm.
driftless region. And so it was largely viewed as sort of the mecca of rough grouse hunting. Of course, I've talked in like other podcasts and stuff, like it was like the culmination of sort of these conditions at that time that were really conducive to rough grouse habitat. But there's been some renewed interest because there's been some detections of rough grouse on several state wildlife areas and state forests. So that's why we're looking at these at sort of right now as the opportunity to use that as a springboard towards restoring diverse forest habitat, not just on these WMAs, but the surrounding areas to hopefully benefit rough grouse and woodcock as well. And kind of the exciting part about it is that we are uh, we're in the process right now of scheduling our interviews to hire that forester. And so we hope to get somebody started shortly after the first of the year. And it's a 5-year agreement with the Iowa DNR. So that person would be in place for 5 years, helping to build a collaborative approach around management on these wildlife management areas, and keep them in place long enough to start to get towards active management and really timber sales on these WMAs that benefit wildlife.
Love it. So we're starting to get into thinking about what's on the horizon, 5 years. I mean, and by the way, if folks in the audience know a forester looking for a sweet gig for the next 5 years who is interested in wildlife conservation, drop us a line. Check out the employment posting page on our website. But in that vein of eyes on the horizon, John, what are some other things, whether for 2026 or just like on the horizon for the next few years, some things that you're really excited about being a part of?
I think continue to grow our stewardship program with the U.S. Forest Service is at the top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
There are some agreements now that I've been with RGS long enough that we're starting to close them out, where we've enacted these timber sales several years ago. They generated revenue through the active forest management on these national forests, and we use that revenue that was generated to reinvest back in those forests into things like additional timber marking for additional timber sales, some forest inventory that helps to support timber management, or looking at non-commercial treatments, things that benefit hunters or habitat, looking at hunter walking trail restoration, or things like even pollinator restoration, or trail maintenance. These things where we've been able to reinvest those dollars are starting to come to a close, and we're working on really the next iteration or the next expansion of those projects. We sort of proven the model that, hey, RGS is an organization, we can lead these projects, get towards results on the ground, and sort of what happens next in terms of expanding and growing the work in our collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I'm really excited about doing. And especially I kind of hinted at expanding into our private lands program in Minnesota, where we've kind of swung that pendulum of where we started with a private lands program in Wisconsin, and now we're growing a public lands program. It's next 5 years. It'll be time to start doing that in Minnesota as well, growing our private lands program in the state. But Mark had a question
Mm-hmm.
about I see Southeast Minnesota, and that's something I truly am excited about doing. Is really we're getting all these programs sort of in place in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, the western UP, and now really trying to push our focus into not just the driftless region, but the Mississippi Flyway as well as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about the flyway is a major migration corridor for American woodcock, and really expanding into our partnerships with our long-standing partners down there, as well as expanding into new partnerships in the driftless region, the Mississippi Flyway. So I think that's something I'm really excited about doing over the next 5 years, and really sort of this the start of that with the Iowa DNR in terms of our partnership based upon that model we proved with the Wisconsin DNR and the northern forests in terms of our workflow. I think is the first big step in that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about folks who might be listening to this and hearing you talk about like the partnership with the Forest Service, for example, the stewardship model, and maybe scratching their heads a little bit around like, all right, so if I'm a member of RGS and AWS, or if I make a donation, or if I'm hustling like crazy as a chapter volunteer with banquets and trying to help fundraise, how does that work dovetail with a partnership like you described in the Forest Service, where you're leveraging the value of a timber sale? Like, can you just unpack the connections and how those contributions really help facilitate and unlock some of these bigger at scale accomplishments like you described with the Forest Service?
Do you want me to really get into the nitty gritty and the specifics and the
Just in
details?
general terms, like, give us the elevator spiel on why folks should feel a sense of ownership around those accomplishments at the scale of these big agreements. Like that agreement with the Forest Service, there was a $2 million partnership established with the Eastern region to do this kind of stewardship work on multiple forests. And then there's also a number of forest level agreements beyond that $2 million. But I want folks to have a sense of like, that's not just the Forest Service making that happen, right? That's the team that is represented in this space here today. Our members, our volunteers, our donors. Like, explain the leverage piece of that a little bit in broad terms.
Yeah, I can do. Um, so I think it's important for our membership to know that when the rubber meets the road, these agreements that we sign with the U.S. Forest Service or even a state agency or NRCS or a foundation or whoever it might be, a lot of times there is match required on those agreements to make them happen. And so we have to bring value add as an organization to make that project work. Otherwise, there are likely other avenues the Forest Service can go, but we bring sort of a value add proposition, both in terms of the match dollars that we can provide, the leverage dollars that we can provide, and I'll kind of touch on kind of what that is. But also, I think there's a level of technical expertise, especially around focus on rough grouse and woodcock. A lot of these forests have you know rough grouse management specific areas in the Western Great Lakes. So I think bringing some of that expertise to different organizations. I can't tell you how frequently we're just asked to provide training to Forest Service, DNR, county foresters in terms of our expertise we bring. Uh, but there's also I think a level of efficiency as well. I think that's what a lot of our public partners really look at is a nonprofit organization like RGS. We can be extremely nimble. We may not have to go through a lot of the red tape or similar red tape as a lot of other, like federal agency or state agency, for example. Um, we can operate on the turn of a dime. We can put out a hiring, um, a job post to hire a position like this forester in Iowa, and after the job posting closes, we can schedule interviews the following week, and we can make an offer, that same day. Where it might take a state agency um, several months to go through that process alone before you can
Mm-hmm.
even talk about making an offer to a forester to start. Contracting as well, awarding a contract to a contractor, um, administering that contract. A lot of levels of efficiency that come with our partners like the Forest Service working with the Rough Grouse Society to add that value proposition. There's also something to be said about how, again, like we're bringing funds raised directly at our banquets or through membership as match, as leverage. Those things cover my time to help to be able to pursue, secure, leverage, and execute these type of agreements. It comes directly in forms of dollar line items in our agreements that
Mm-hmm.
say, we're going to take money from, this chapter's contributions and, put in these gates on this hunter walking trail, or we're going to install this pollinator project that we can leverage that project as part of our match on that stewardship agreement. Because it's not this sort of give and take through stewardship. It's really a collaboration, and that's really what stewardship is all about. At the end of the day, is really collaboration with our partners like the U.S. Forest Service, and so it's really taking all that support, packaging it, and leveraging it as much as we can. And there are some special thanks. I won't embarrass anybody, but we do have members who are superstars, really heavily involved in some of our stewardship agreements. We have people going out and mowing waterfowl impoundments in northern Minnesota. You know who you are if you're on. Um, we use that as leverage on that agreement. Your time spent mowing waterfowl impoundments is our match that we're leveraging to make that agreement happen. We have
That's
another
awesome.
gentleman in Wisconsin who is offered to mow hunter walking trails on an annual basis as part of our agreement leverage, showing that, hey, not just staff but our membership are bought into this model, bought into the system. We can leverage our resources collectively, be really efficient, and be all strong advocates um, for our forest wildlife.
That's great. So it's not just the direct accomplishment of that work on the ground. It's like unlocking the access to much larger, like, I mean, typically we're talking like 5 to 1 or even greater levels of match coming into some of these large agreements. So like if you're somebody, volunteering an hour of your time, figure out the value of that hour, multiply it by a factor of X, and that gives us that much more work happening on the ground. It's really a powerful
And
model.
I'm not going to lie, the accounting gets very difficult to
Oh man,
keep track of, because it's
yes,
just like how we force multiply sometimes. Is we might enter into, and these are real examples where we've entered into a stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, and we said, we're starting to implement this project, and we said, it'd be really nice if we had extra money to do X, Y, and Z, but we don't have that money. But we maybe have a little bit from our chapter, but it's not nearly enough to do what we want to do. And we use our agreement to, let's say, take our match leverage from a chapter, apply for a state grant, and then get awarded a state grant to do X, Y, and Z, but we use our agreement with the foresters as the mechanism for delivery of then not just leveraging our chapter dollars, but leveraging our chapter dollars on a state grant to leverage on the stewardship agreement. And we have several examples where we've been able to do that. And when we apply for things like state funds, it looks really beneficial when we can say, we have an existing partnership in place with, this particular forest, this national forest. And so we can increase our odds of getting awarded those funds and really starting to leverage and maximize the work that we're doing. And again, it's all about collaboration. It's all about what do we bring to the table in terms of that value proposition as well.
Absolutely. Folks, you've got a few more minutes left for questions that you might want to ask of John Steigerwaldt, our Forest Conservation Director from our Western Great Lakes region. John, as we approach the top of the hour, are there any other highlights from the year you want to be able to touch on? Anything else you want to point to for the year ahead? Any other call to action for this community of conservationists who are with us here tonight?
That's a good question. I think maybe getting more to Mark's question about the driftless region. Again, really, I'm really looking forward to building out our driftless initiative. Like I said, that was really one thing. Really wanted to get in place was our agreement with the Iowa DNR, really in the heart of the driftless region, area where we've seen rough grouse numbers decline for a very long time, precipitous decline. We do have a forest wildlife specialist in Wisconsin currently working in the northern driftless region on private lands out of Trempealeau County. So we've kind of been dipping our toe into a driftless region program for quite a long time and slowly starting to put some of our partners together. But there's been studies like the Eastern Woodcock Migration Study that has had birds with transmitters in the Western Great Lakes, and really looking at areas like Iowa and the Mississippi flyways being really important migration corridors for woodcock. Stuff that we already knew, but really reaffirmed through that research. And we did get some, I think, really interesting results where we wouldn't normally think of migration hotspots being through that research. But I think building out that driftless program is going to be one thing I'm really looking forward to doing in the coming years. We are in talks right now with the Whitewater WMA, as Mark brings up, about a specific project for invasive species management on the Whitewater WMA, which will likely be something we put in for early next year in terms of state grant funding.
I love the fact that there's this energy from your perspective, John, and also in the chat here with Mark thinking about the Mississippi River Flyway. And in just a couple weeks, a small group of us are going to be heading down to Louisiana to talk specifically about woodcock conservation opportunities and really starting to think about trying to connect our community at that continental scale, right? Thinking in terms of stewarding habitat from summer to winter range for the species and all parts in between. It's a phenomenal opportunity to think about woodcock as kind of a gateway into this conversation and community about forest and habitat stewardship. Obviously, rough grouse in your region, John, you've got a good chunk of kind of the stronghold but in terms of getting more people excited about our mission and our community and upland bird hunting in general, I think there's a ton of potential for us to be making inroads elsewhere where the woodcock are spending portions of their seasons. So it'll be fun to see what comes of that. John, we're here at the top of the hour. I want to say a huge thanks for the time. How can members help with the Driftless program? Feel free to email me later. That's coming from Mark in the chat. Email there. Thanks, Mark, for the engagement. Appreciate the questions that have come in. Again, I'll mention Giving Tuesday. Follow that link. Check out ways to support the organization. And folks, we have one more session coming up this evening, starting in just a few minutes. We'll be bringing in my friend and colleague, Mark Hatfield, Chief Conservation Officer for RGS and AWS, will be joining us here in a few minutes, along with a couple of our other team members for sort of an interview that's going to be happening. So stick with us. John, any closing remarks as we wrap up this portion of the agenda?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't plan for this part, but maybe I could say, we have, for a lot of you, just about a month left for the rough grouse season. Like I said, I didn't nearly get out as much as I had hoped this rough grouse season. I'm going to continue to get out myself, and I hope all of you do as well, and have a safe, productive hunt as well as a holiday season.
Haha, well said. We'll leave it there, folks. Thanks for joining us tonight on this Giving Tuesday. Thanks for your support of our organization. Stay safe in the woods. Get somebody new introduced to the great outdoors. Thanks for the time, everybody. Over and out.